Hello, everybody. Welcome to another delicious, nutritious edition of the Growth Lab podcast. I am your host, Glen Owen. I am a pain-free personal trainer from Newmarket, Ontario. And today we're talking all about how do we progress exercise? What are all the different tools that you can use to progress exercise? And the way we're going to look at is we're going to start with the ones that are going to be the least stressful, the easiest for your joints. And then we're going to move up to ones that are going to be a little bit more stressful for your joints, maybe push you a little bit more. And as we go through these, please keep in mind, none of them are better than the others. But when we think about the health of your joints and moving and feeling your best, we have to take into account the current tolerance of your joints, which means that it's usually better to start with easier, simpler, less stressful things than move progressively to more stressful things. It's got to be goal dependent, what you do. It's got to be dependent on your physiology and your body. Having said that, let's get into it. So first and foremost, I'm going to share one 30-second tidbit, then we'll get into all the different ways you can progress. And this is this idea called PRAM, progress, regress, abort, maintain. This is a concept I got from a gentleman named Tom Purvis. He runs a resistance training specialist course, which I've taken, and he's a brilliant man. He knows a lot about the human body, absolutely tremendous loads of information from him. And this idea of progress, regress, abort, maintain is just that any exercise that you're doing, you can progress it and move it forward in a number of ways, which we're going to talk about it today. You can regress it if things don't feel good. You can abort and just stop doing it if it's really a bad idea, or you can just keep maintaining your current course of what you're doing. You don't always have to move forward and challenge yourself differently. Sometimes maintenance is progression. So keep that in mind. You can progress in any of these different ways: progress, regress, abort, and maintain. So with that in mind, let's get into all the different ways that you can progress your exercise. So if you're wondering what the simplest, easiest way for you to progress your exercise is, it's quite simple. It's actually just increase the frequency. What does that mean? It means we're keeping the same exercise parameters. Maybe it's the same amount of sets that you're doing, the same exercise, the same repetitions. We're keeping all of that the same, but we might just increase the frequency a little bit. If you've got 2 minutes of exercise homework you're supposed to do every day and it feels pretty good right now, maybe just try adding a third or a fourth. Keeping everything the same and then adding it a little bit more in terms of just doing another round of that or another bout of that is going to be a pretty simple way for you to progress. And because we're not really changing any other variables that we could potentially be playing around with, it's the safest way to continue to move and progress your exercise forward. Second to that, you could increase the duration in which you're doing an exercise. The second thing you can do is increase the duration in which you are doing an exercise. So very commonly, when I first start working with people, I have them do something called isometric exercise. It's where the joints aren't moving, but the muscles are contracting. Think about holding a plank. That's a great example of a isometric exercise because it's challenging, it can be hard, but you're not actually moving anywhere. And so for exercises like this, just doing it 5 seconds longer is a great way to go about it. And there are exercises for isometrics for every single joint in the body. And you can even create a lot of really weird stuff like pushing your arm back and up into a wall this way. That could be an exercise. It's totally custom tailored to you. But doing that and just increasing the duration is a really simple, easy way to progress your exercise. And the reason it's really simple and easy is just because you're doing the same thing but a little bit longer. So you already know that you can tolerate it, and now we're just trying to bump up the endurance a little bit and the output by holding it just a little bit longer. So the third way we can now progress exercise is going to be more dynamic exercises, because you can't really progress isometrics with this one, but that's going to be to increase your range of motion. You may find that when you first do an exercise like a squat or a split squat or a machine in the gym like a chest press or a leg extension, whatever that might be, you may be limited in your range of motion, maybe because it hurts a little bit getting to a certain place as you do a leg extension or a chest press, or maybe you just don't have the strength right now to bring your arms all the way up overhead when you do an exercise, but you feel like each and every time you do it, you might be getting a little bit better. So one of the easy ways to improve and progress your exercise is just going to be to increase the range of motion. The beautiful thing about increasing your range of motion is that this happens very automatically when you do exercise. Very seldomly do people try to go through a very small repetition range of motion when they're doing something, unless that's the goal, unless there's some reason they have to do that. Most people are going to instinctively try to go through a full range of motion. Having said that, if you aren't right now exercising through a full range of motion, but you know your joints feel pretty good for an exercise, you should start going through a full range of motion. Even something like a chest press. And if you're listening on Spotify, you've got this on YouTube in the back, we might not be able to see this, but you might just be default going through maybe 3/4 of that range of motion. Maybe you could go back a little further, hold for a second, and then push out of that position. That way, you get a little bit more range of motion and you challenge, get your muscles stronger through a greater range. And the great thing about training through a greater range of motion, if you do that for all your joints, your mobility improves. Because all mobility is your ability for your muscle to contract in extreme positions, both short, like the top of a bicep curl, and long, like when the arm's fully extended in a bicep curl. And so if you can increase your range of motion in every exercise you do, your mobility and strength will improve. The next thing is going to be to increase the intention. Now, this is something I think a lot of people don't even really think about. But what are you thinking about when you do the exercise? Are you just going through the motions? Because if you are, you could start thinking about squeezing your muscles in a different way in order to create a different exercise effect. Now, for some people, squeezing their muscles in a different way when they do an exercise can be way more challenging, and it might cause some discomfort if they activate some muscles that maybe don't want to be used right now. A great example would be if someone has a tendonitis, which is an overuse sensation in the tendons of the muscles. Things like golfer's elbow or swimmer's elbow are tendonitis related injuries. And so people going through these exercises, and if they squeeze really, really hard at the bottom or the top, they might actually increase the discomfort, which is why this falls a little bit later on the list. Now, if we think about intention, it can be beneficial in so many different ways. We might be able to activate and use some parts of our muscle more than others, or we might be able to take tension off and take stress off certain areas that don't feel good. So let me give you an example. If you were, for example, to be doing a chest press machine at the gym where you've got handles and you're holding it, you could actually think about trying to squeeze and push your hands in the entire time, and trust me, you'd feel more of your chest start working. If you tried to push your arms out as you do a chest press, you'd feel more triceps. And that's because the direction in which we think about pushing our feet or our hands when we're doing an exercise, or even just thinking about squeezing certain muscles when we do an exercise, will have them contract harder and stronger and more intently, more actively, I'm struggling for my words, more actively cause them to work even more than they might if you were just in default movement mode. Now, for some people, like I said, squeezing things harder can cause some discomfort, so be careful with this one. So far we've covered you can increase your frequency, doing the same exercises with the same parameters, but just more often. You can increase the duration of sets that you're doing where you're holding isometric exercises. You can increase your range of motion, which is the excursion your body moves through when you're doing an exercise, or you could increase the intention, how hard you're squeezing your muscles, or which direction you're thinking about pushing or pulling your joints while you are doing an exercise. So following this, the next way that you can progress your exercise is to increase the volume. Volume is a way in the world of exercise that we measure the amount of work that you're doing. So if we said that you were to go home and let's say do 2 sets of bicep curls, and each set you're trying to do, let's say 10 repetitions, the total volume for that would be 20 repetitions, right? 2 times 10. Or we might look at the volume just as in 2 sets. Or maybe it looks like just a total number of repetitions. I might say to a client, I want you to go home and do 50 bicep curls in a day. And it doesn't matter to me how you bracket them up, just get 50 done. And so we could say increase the volume by either increasing the amount of sets. So we can go from 2 sets to 3 sets. And in this example of sets of 10, it would be from 20 reps to 30 reps, which is a 33.3% repeating increase in the amount of volume. I could say try to do a couple extra repetitions. That would also increase the volume. This is really, really helpful when we're trying to add some muscle tissue on someone's body if they can tolerate it, because the signalers for hypertrophy often come down to the amount of volume that you're doing with the amount of load that you're using. And What other ways can we use this thing here as I talk off the top of my head? Increasing volume can also help with endurance. If you are doing more sets of an exercise or more repetitions, you can start triggering different energy pathways in your muscles, causing more endurance. Oftentimes for my clients, I ask them to go from doing 10 repetitions of something to 15 to 20. And we increase the volume that way because now that it feels better to do those movements, to do those actions, I want to see them have more endurance because I know if they have more endurance, that means they can tolerate more in their day-to-day life. They're not going to get as tired as quickly, which means they can walk up maybe 3 flights of stairs instead of 2. Or maybe they can go for a walk for 30 minutes instead of 15 without feeling tightness and achiness. And so volume is another way that we could continue to progress our exercise. The next way that we can progress our exercise, and as a reminder, these are progressively more and more stressful to the body, is to increase the load. In this case, the load is going to be the external resistance. How much extra force are we generating? Now, this can be done in numerous different ways. The simplest way to think about is to increase the weights. If I have someone doing a chest press at 80 pounds, if I say go up to 85, I'm increasing the load. I'm increasing the amount of force they have to deal with. But force can look like other things too. If we were to have someone do push-ups on a wall and they're quite vertical, they're not using as much of their body weight if they were doing push-ups where their hands are on the ground and their feet are on the ground. Because when you are more horizontal, you're dealing with more of your body weight, so there's more load. And when you're more vertical, you're dealing with less of your body weight, so there's less load. So we can change both the body positions and the amount of external force in order to progress an exercise. We could use thicker, more denser bands, and that could also provide more resistance. I could have someone step a little far away from a place where a band is anchored to cause them to have a little bit more resistance because now the band is stretched farther, and we know the farther a band is stretched, the more resistance it provides. So these are all different ways that we can increase load. Interestingly and conversely, we can actually use this same tactic to decrease challenge on the body. If I have someone squatting up and down and they're a heavier person, their body weight limits them from going down farther because they lose strength as they get further and further into a squat, I could have them hold on to a table or onto a band so that as they sink down, they can either use their arms to take weight off so they can get lower, or that band as it lengthens will actually provide more of an offloading resistance and they'll get lighter as they go down. So we can use this way of adding load as a way to also regress people if we need to as well. So the next one here might seem like it's counterintuitive and doesn't belong here, but I really think it does. It's to decrease stability. Decreasing stability. What does that look like? Well, it might look like a number of different things, but ultimately when we're talking about decreasing stability, often what it comes down to is decreasing the amount of support that they have. So for example, it's pretty easy for you to squat up and down perhaps on 2 feet, but if I told you to do a split squat where you got 1 foot forward and 1 foot back and you come up and down, all of a sudden that change in your foot position puts a lot more load on your front leg versus your back leg, and if so facto, we've got an increase in load and a decrease in stability because our balance is now changed as well. On the balance end of things, if I take someone from 2 feet to just standing on 1 foot, that's a huge balance challenge because instead of now them having a very large base of support, they now have a very narrow, small one. And that can, for some people, depending on the goal, be very beneficial and a great way to challenge their body. However, decreasing stability does not come without costs. If we decrease stability, we are inherently putting people at more of a risk of losing balance. And if there's a greater risk of losing balance, them tripping and falling and hurting themselves, that to me puts this particular way of progressing exercise, which is decreasing stability, in a place where, yeah, it could be more risky for them. It can be more challenging. So decreasing stability by removing supports with hands or arms, or by narrowing the center of balance by going from 2 legs to 1, or if they're on all fours, going from 4 limbs of support, like 2 hands and 2 feet, to just 1 hand and 2 feet, are all different ways to progress an exercise. Moving forward from there, getting close to the end of the list now, we've got increasing the use of other joints. If you're a seasoned exerciser, you might know this as quote unquote cheating. But A practical example of this would be doing bicep curls. I might have someone doing bicep curls to failure where they can't do anymore. Their muscles are burning. They can no longer concentrically, which is to say they can no longer overcome the resistance or load from those dumbbells from the bottom position coming up to the top. And so what they could do is they might be able to use a little bit of shoulders, or they might be able to use a little bit of momentum on the dumbbells to get those weights a little higher. They might be able to use a little bit of inertia by incorporating and using other joints to get those weights up in the air before they control them downwards. Now, because this methodology means you take a joint to failure concentrically, right, lifting the weights up before you use this technique, it's inherently more risky because you're really taking these muscles to a really end fatigue point. And if you've got arthritis, if you've got a tendonitis, if you have something else that may be compromising your movement, using other joints, doing these cheating repetitions, using inertia and momentum strategically could cause you some pain discomfort that your body may not be ready for. So I put using other joints and cheating reps a little bit lower on the list. You could also, and this comes down to our last point here, increase the tempo. Increase the tempo. Why is increasing the tempo the last way that you could potentially increase and progress your exercise, and why is it the most risky? Because the second we start trying to move really, really fast, we are asking the brain and the central nervous system and the neuromuscular system to default to strong patterns. When we move quickly, our muscles, our joints, all of our physiology has to move in a very precise way. And if it doesn't, we risk beating up our joints in ways that may not feel good or cause injury. That's not a very good thing. If I took someone with knee arthritis, and on the very first day I said, we're going to go up as quickly as we can, they might move so fast that their body doesn't know how to manage that force correctly, both internally, with the forces being generated from the muscles, and externally for the load placed on them from either the machine or the bands or whatever that might be. And they might move so quickly that their body can't manage that. We might make their arthritis worse. We might cause them to create damage in other tissues in their body. And that is something that I want to avoid with my clients at all costs. And so when we are thinking about increasing tempo, that for me can be extremely risky. It's usually one of the last things I move toward. But if someone can handle exercise more often, they can do things I want them to do longer, they can move through a great range of motion with control, they have strong control over the body, which is another way of saying they have very strong use of intention, they can tolerate a fair large amount of volume, they've been shown to be able to handle loads at these joints that we're training, and they've also been shown that to be okay with decreased stability. Now we're going to start working on increasing the tempo with faster movement. So these are all the different ways that you can progress your exercise. Increase the frequency of it, the duration of it, the range of motion, increase your intention, increase your volume, increase your load, decrease your stability, increase the use of other joints, or increase tempo. Now, it doesn't always have to be as clear-cut as choosing one of these things. You can always choose any number of these different things in order to progress your exercise. You may increase both the load and the tempo at which you're moving. You may increase the amount of volume you do in a week for exercise while also increasing the load and the resistance of the machines that you're using. It's not as clear-cut as choose one of these things. But really what it's all about is understanding the tolerance of the joints that are involved in all of these different movements. There's something called the Goldilocks zone, which one of my colleagues and mentors, Brandon, shared with me, which is the idea that the planet Earth is just the right amount from the planet Earth, reset. Planet Earth is just the right amount away from the sun to have biological, oh my gosh. The Earth is just the right distance away from the sun to have biological matter grow on it. If you're any closer to the sun, it'd be too cold. Any farther away, it'd be too hot. We're just in the perfect zone. So I take this concept and we apply it to exercise, and that there is going to be an ideal zone of load, of volume, of intensity, of intention, of range of motion that each and every joint in your body can handle. And if we blow past the tolerance for any of these different things or any of the different joints, we will cause damage. Now, the converse is true as well. If we don't stimulate the joints enough, the muscles begin to atrophy. The bones become more brittle. they begin to age over time, just like everything else in the body. That's when people become more susceptible to osteoporosis. And so when it comes to how you progress your exercise and what exercises you do, you have to make sure that you're within the tolerance zone of the joints that are involved in that exercise. And it's one of the reasons why machines are so great, because you can do a whole bunch of single joint machines and be very, very crisp and clear about what you're doing and be able to monitor it very, very well so that you don't injure yourself. If you go right from a knee extension to a squat, well, in the knee extension, we just have to make sure that the control in the knee health is there. But now if you're squatting, you have to make sure your ankle health on both sides is top notch. You have to make sure your knee health on both sides is top notch, your hip health, your back health, a whole bunch of different things have to go right in order to make use of that exercise. So this conversation about how do I progress exercise, it's an important one, because ultimately how you progress exercise is going to dictate how well your joints feel. And how well your joints feel and their capabilities will directly impact your ability to enjoy your life and your activities of daily living. I cannot tell you how many clients I've worked with where we just work on the lowest common denominator, that elephant in the room, that one joint that just isn't doing what it needs to. It's just not up to par when it comes to output. We get that better and everything feels a lot better for them to do. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, your ability to move your body is a combination of the output of all the joints. And if all of your joints are much healthier, everything in life is going to get a lot easier. Everybody, my name is Glenn. This has been another delicious, nutritious edition of the Growth Lab podcast. Which of these different progressions is your favorite? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care, everybody.